The nation more than doubled the number of new COVID-19 cases compared to Monday. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department lowered its travel advisory for South Korea to the lowest level. The Russian military reportedly began a new phase of war in Ukraine. The troops launched a full-scale ground offensive to take control of Donbas. The World Bank slashes global economic growth estimate. The IMF also revised down its latest projection for 2022. Hello and welcome. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with our top story. Russia's invasion looks set to escalate even further as the Kremlin launched a full-scale aggression in Ukraine's east. But President Zelensky says the country will fight back no matter what. Kim Sung-min starts us off.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow has launched a full-scale ground assault in Ukraine's east. This comes as explosions and heavy shelling are being reported all along the front lines in the east, a distance spanning nearly 500 kilometers. The authorities in Kyiv describing the situation as hell. The Donbas region is the industrial heartland of eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists are already partly in control. The Kremlin has declared its intention to capture the region after failing to seize Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. It's believed to be a strategically crucial area, as the control of the Donbas will allow the Kremlin to establish a southern corridor to the Crimea, which Russia has annexed already. In response to the rapid escalation of Russia's assault in the area, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky reiterated his determination to fight back.
No matter how many Russian troops are driven there, we will fight. We will defend ourselves and we will do it every day. We won't give up anything Ukrainian.
According to a Ukrainian official, troops in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions have repelled 7 Russian attacks and destroyed 10 tanks. Backing up those efforts are several shipments of weapons from the U.S., which have reportedly now arrived. According to the Pentagon, these are part of a military aid package worth $800 million. U.S. President Joe Biden will also hold a call with American allies on Tuesday to discuss the Ukraine crisis with a stated aim of holding Moscow accountable. In the meantime, Ukraine's efforts to evacuate its civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol have failed repeatedly, according to Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk. She said that while difficult negotiations are underway, the Russians have so far refused to provide a corridor. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, China's Vice Foreign Minister emphasized Beijing's intention to continue strategic coordination with Moscow, regardless of how the war with Ukraine unfolds. Liu Chang's remarks came during a meeting with Russian Ambassador to China, Andrei Denisov, on Monday. The two exchanged opinions on bilateral relations, as well as an array of other international and regional issues. The diplomats agreed that ties have been strategically evolving under the leadership of Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The Russian official pointed out his country has always prioritized developing relations with China. The World Bank lowered its growth projection for the global economy to just 3.2%. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the main reason. The crisis is expected to cause economies to shrink in Europe and Central Asia. Kim Yeon-sung helps us look beyond the digits.
The World Bank's global growth forecast for 2022 has been cut by nearly a full percentage point. World Bank President David Malpass said on Monday local time that the bank slashed the world's growth estimate from 4.1% to just 3.2%. The bank had already slashed its estimate by 0.2% back in January due to COVID-19 and supply bottlenecks. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine has forced it to slash growth rates by even more. The war in Ukraine has driven up food and energy prices. Europe and Central Asia have been hit hardest and are expected to contract by more than 4%. Malpass said this was the biggest factor behind the dimmer growth outlook. Malpass added that he expects to discuss with the board a new 15-month crisis financing package of $170 billion. This will support the world's poorest countries and ones that have accepted refugees from Ukraine. This proposed package is about $10 billion larger than the bank's earlier COVID-19 relief package. The world's top economic officials are to discuss the economic crisis during this week's spring meeting between the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund, and also during the upcoming meeting of G20 finance chiefs and central bank governors. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The IMF also revised down its projection, citing the war in Ukraine and growing inflation. At 3.6%, it's down 0.8 percentage points from its January outlook. It expects Europe to take the biggest hit, slashing its forecast by more than 1 percentage point to 2.8%. This as the bloc struggles with surging prices of energy and grain. The projection for South Korea was also edged down by 0.5 percentage point to 2.5%. While the IMF assumes the world economy will rebound in the following year, it would not be sufficient enough to fully recover from the losses from 2022. Back here in the nation, the parliament gave its approval to appoint Lee Chang-yong as the next central banker. The incoming governor expects the current high inflation to last for the next year or two and vowed to ensure the BOK work to rein it in. Ji-young shares with us his remarks.
President Moon's nominee to lead the Bank of Korea, Lee Chang-yong, will take office on Thursday, now that Parliament has given its approval for his appointment. In his confirmation hearing Tuesday, he suggested that if he's put in charge, the BOK will continue to raise interest rates to tame high inflation. Sharing his views on monetary policy, he said, high inflation will likely last for a while.
The high inflation is due to the rise in oil prices amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic. I believe that this inflationary pressure will continue for another 1 or 2 years.
He added that inflation could, in fact, rise further as demand recovers and people spend more due to greater government outlays and the end of social distancing.
The expected inflation rate is rising, so we will do our best to signal the curbing of inflation by raising rates, even if this is not what some people prefer.
But he added, if South Korea hikes its key interest rate quickly, as the U.S. appears to be doing, it could damage the country's economy. Instead, he said monetary policies will be implemented at an appropriate speed in a way that can tame inflation while not undercutting the momentum of economic growth or having a negative impact on vulnerable people. He noted that as South Korean society ages and the workforce shrinks, there's a need for long-term monetary policy aimed at preventing a decline in economic growth. Also, he said a pan-governmental task force should be formed to ensure a soft landing in terms of the country's rising household debt, something he said cannot be done by the central bank alone. Ji-young, Arirang News.
With the market closing at the highest in around a month, the South Korean won has depreciated against the U.S. dollar. On Tuesday, it closed at 1,236.9, 2.5 above the closing price from the day before. The dollar has been gaining power following tightening from the Fed and due to prolonged war in Ukraine. Compared to Japanese yen, the won has been on a 13-day losing streak against the greenback, a record high for at least 50 years. The yen dropped to a low of 128.31 per dollar on Tuesday, the weakest level since May 2002. The Bank of Japan said the rapid change could cause problems for its companies and that business plans need made while taking such negative factors into account. The Chinese government plans to let companies in certain key sectors resume production in Shanghai to lighten the blow the citywide lockdown would have on global supply chains. The so-called zero-COVID policy is still an immense challenge for other countries, including South Korea, which needs components for cars especially. Min Soo-kyun has the full story.
Shanghai is on track to resume production after the Chinese government announced plans to help key industries get back to business in its commercial hub. Around 600 companies in the semiconductor, automobile, and medical sectors will resume operations. But some say starting production lines in Shanghai will not be easy, as it still remains difficult to bring workers to factories due to lockdowns. An added problem is that China's strict zero-COVID measures have also expanded to other regions, including the Jiangsu province.
About 22.8% of total Chinese imports come from Jiangsu province and around 16.5% from Shandong province, which is much larger than the imports from Shanghai. And in the case of Guangdong province, it is about 12%. So if COVID-19 spreads around there, the actual effect on us would be even greater.
Not to mention, China's lockdowns have already hit the auto industry, and it's not the only sector to be affected. South Korea is heavily dependent on Chinese imports, particularly in batteries and chips. So if productions in production lines were to continue, there would be a ripple effect on South Korea's economy as inventories of raw materials are running low. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Officials in Beijing have reportedly advised residents to not make unnecessary trips to other regions until after the Labor Day holiday next month. The Global Times reports the advisory released on Monday states that Beijing residents planning to travel may be required to receive approval from the local authorities at the destination they intend to travel to or their companies or institutions. The move comes as the COVID-19 lockdown in the city of Shanghai has been extended for about a month. More than 390,000 people have been infected since March, recording the country's worst outbreak in 2 years. South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally rebounded. Over 118,000 new cases have reported as of midnight Tuesday, more than double that of Monday, as a greater number of people sought testing after the weekend. Slightly above 93,000 confirmed by 6 p.m. The country's first cases of the XE and XM variants have been detected. 2 cases of the XE strain and 1 of the XM were found. The XE strain is known to be 10% more transmissible than the regular Omicron variant. Social distancing is over in South Korea, but masks are staying on for now. Authorities plan to focus on encouraging people to follow select protocols like mask wearing and ventilating. The incoming government, meanwhile, is working on getting more COVID-19 pills in case there's a resurgence. Lee Young-eun brings the updates.
With social distancing rules fully lifted in South Korea as of this week, health authorities are discussing revising virus prevention protocols at public facilities like cafes and restaurants for people to follow voluntarily. This includes frequent ventilation, keeping face masks on as much as possible, and requiring senior centers to allow only those who are fully vaccinated with a 3rd shot to enter. This comes as the overall risk of COVID-19 in South Korea remains to be classified as high, the 2nd highest level in the 5-tier evaluation scheme, due to fatality still at alarming level, posting over 1,700 in total last week, and most importantly as the highly contagious Stealth Omicron now accounting for 91.5% of the cases sampled. With a resurgence highly possible as early as this fall or winter, the incoming Yoon administration is already devising post-Omicron responses focused on treatments. And Yoon's transition team has asked health authorities to expand the eligibility of the COVID-19 pills to those over 12 years old who are at high risk of developing severe symptoms.
The pills are currently administered to those over 60 or those in their 40s and 50s with weakened immune systems. The plan is to include those over 12 years old with underlying health conditions.
Shortly after the announcement, the KDC has said the measures will need to be thoroughly reviewed medically, although no major side effects from that age group have been reported in other countries. As for the supply, Yoon's transition team is in talks with the current government about the purchase of additional COVID-19 pills. It had previously negotiated with Pfizer and helped South Korea's contracted doses arrive earlier than planned. Young-eun, Arirang News.
Seoul could soon be seeing a lot more visitors from the States, not only because social distancing is over, but also the U.S. State Department has lowered its travel advisory for South Korea to the lowest level. Song Yoo-jin has the details.
With countries around the world returning to pre-pandemic life, they are easing or even lifting overseas travel restrictions. The U.S. State Department on Monday removed South Korea from its highest Level 4 do not travel list. South Korea is now a Level 1 travel destination, which is seen as a low safety and security risk. South Korea is now expected to receive more visitors from the U.S. The State Department's travel advisories had previously correlated with the travel recommendations of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention since the outbreak of the pandemic. However, last week it announced a stop to this in light of increasing vaccination rates worldwide and lesser risks posed by COVID-19 variants. Separate from the U.S. State Department changes, the CDC also moved South Korea from its Level 4 Do Not Travel list on Monday and placed it at Level 3 along with France, Israel, Turkey, Australia, Russia, and Japan. While all Americans are advised to avoid traveling to Level 4 destinations, only those who are unvaccinated are discouraged from traveling to those on Level 3. In February, South Korea was put at Level 4 due to a surge in virus cases. While the CDC said last week it's reserving Level 4 travel health notices for regions with special circumstances like escalating case counts or an emerging variant, as of Tuesday, there are no more countries on the Level 4 list. While the U.S. did not provide specific reasons for lowering its travel advisories on South Korea, experts are assuming the country's decline in COVID-19 cases and easing of social distancing rules, such as lifting the self-isolation period of vaccinated entrants, to have influenced the decision. 송유진, Arirang News.
With authorities here in the nation dialing back virus prevention measures, schools are planning on bringing back field trips. According to the Seoul Metropolitan Office of Education on Tuesday, almost 600 schools are considering organizing field trips or camps. Of those, more than 260 were high schools. But for schools to actually plan out any trips, more than 70% of the parents have to give their permission. Seoul's Education Office will provide support for some schools to help them carry out PCR tests to make sure activities can take place safely. The first meeting between President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden could come even earlier than previously thought if Yoon takes part in the U.S.-led Global COVID-19 Summit next month, which will be held online. World leaders will be discussing ways to deal with the pandemic. Yoon Jung-min reports.
There's the possibility that South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden could meet for the first time online next month. In a joint statement released on Monday with Belize, Germany, Indonesia, and Senegal, the White House said the U.S. will co-host the second Global COVID-19 Summit on May 12th. That's earlier than a possible Yoon-Biden summit speculated to take place face-to-face in Seoul later in May. The president-elect's team said whether to join the event will be decided and announced after Yoon is inaugurated as the president on May 10th.
The schedule for after the inauguration will be dealt with at the presidential office. There will be coordination beforehand, but there's nothing we can confirm at this moment.
The U.S. held the first global COVID-19 summit last September, and South Korean President Moon Jae-in took part in the meeting virtually. But since they will meet virtually, it remains to be seen whether Yoon and Biden will be able to say hello to each other and have some communication online, as world leaders usually send pre-recorded video messages. The White House says leaders will be discussing vaccinations and mitigating the impact of the pandemic. The agenda is expected to include getting more shots into arms, deploying tests and treatments, as well as expanding and protecting the health workforce. Amid rising geopolitical tensions with the U.S., it's unlikely that Russia and China will join the meeting. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
With combined military training exercise now underway, the U.S. Department of Defense called the drills a demonstration of the seriousness of Washington's commitment to South Korea's defense. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby confirmed on Monday that the annual drill had begun while criticizing North Korea for responding to U.S. calls for dialogue with more missile tests. He insisted diplomacy is the best way to achieve denuclearization and reiterated that the Biden administration has made it clear it's always willing to hold talks with the North. The U.S. envoy for North Korea issues Sung Kim met with Seoul's foreign minister and the Minister of Unification. They discussed the need to maintain their strong alliance, deal with the regime's provocations, and bring it back to talks. Han Sung-woo has the details.
The United States Special Representative for North Korea, Sung Kim, met Tuesday morning in Seoul with South Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs Chung Eui-yong, and according to the ministry, they discussed ways to manage the tense situation on the Korean peninsula. Chung reportedly stressed the importance of a strong joint defense posture and mutual cooperation to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. The U.S. envoy agreed and also emphasized that North Korea's provocations should be met with a strong response. He reaffirmed, though, that the U.S. is open to talks with the North without preconditions. In the afternoon, Kim met with Unification Minister Lee In-young. Minister Lee stressed the need for peace and stability in the region by continuously working together in the search for a diplomatic solution to North Korea's raising of tensions. Kim reportedly thanked Lee, who'll be leaving office soon, for his cooperation while in his post, and told him too that the U.S. is open to dialogue with the North. On Monday, the day he arrived, Kim met with his counterpart, Seoul's nuclear envoy No Kyu-duk, and vowed to work closely with him in dealing with North Korea's provocations responsibly and decisively. Kim's expected to also meet with top officials from the incoming Yoon Suk-yeol administration over the next few days before leaving on Friday. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Multiple U.S. government agencies warned of potential North Korean cyber attacks on American cryptocurrency and blockchain companies. The FBI, the Treasury Department, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said jointly on Monday local time that attacks are triggered when victims download cryptocurrency applications to the computers that have malware. This will allow hackers to infiltrate the computers and initiate illegal blockchain transactions. While the attempts are being spearheaded by the North Korean state-sponsored hackers dubbed the Lazarus Group, other groups are also believed to be involved. Last month, Russian and Chinese military aircrafts entered the South Korean air defense zone. 2 Russian aircraft stayed in the Korean Air Defense Identification Zone above the EC on March 24th for around 30 minutes before moving away. This zone is not a territorial airspace, but requires foreign aircrafts to identify themselves before entering. The incident came just hours before North Korea launched an ICBM. The day before, a Chinese military plane was in the air defense zone located south of Jeju Island for about 2 minutes. This is an area where the air defense zones of South Korea and China overlap.
Conditions will stay warm tomorrow with wide temperature gaps between day and night. Most parts of the country will see a difference of 10 degrees or more. Temperature gaps in Jiangsu, Jeollabuk-do province will exceed 20 degrees. It is recommended to dress in layers and outfits that work for these very fluctuating temperatures because it is easy to catch a cold. Dry conditions are intensifying across the nation. Dry weather advisories are in place for more than half of the country, including the capital area. The risk of wildfires will be higher for the East Coast as violent winds are in the forecast. Winds will be gusting up to 15 meters per second until Thursday. Please be extra careful with anything that can start a fire. Sunshine will dominate for the morning hours. Seoul will start off at 9 degrees Celsius. As for the daily highs, Gwangju will get up to 24 degrees. Chuncheon 23 and Gyeongju will be topping out at 27 degrees. Western central regions will see high concentrations of fine dust tomorrow. On Friday, the capital region will see brief showers. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
This is where we have to wrap things up. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for staying with us.